Hi everyone, I want to go ahead and share the slides that I made going over Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So let's jump right in. So going over the history of this one, basically we are looking at a text that was written around 1375, maybe 1375 to 1400, but definitely like the later end of the 14th century. And keeping that in mind, this is not going to be based on events of the that time period, right? It's going to be based more around 450 to 500. And then so if you think back to our slides on Anglo-Saxon history and things like that, just kind of remember looking through the time period, like we're looking at post-Anglo-Norman, um, you know, Britain, and so this is going to be reflecting a much earlier time period. The other thing to remember is that this is going to be after the Pleading of English Act, presumably in 1362. And remember, that's when they were trying to change the language of law to English. And so there's kind of this pushback. There's this whole, war and everything about trying to I mean, it's complicated, but basically, the way that it affects things is that we're having English being used as a language in some of the stuff that we're reading instead of French, even though, before maybe French would have been the language that would be considered the most appropriate, or even another language. So, this is another example of something written in English dialect. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this in terms of English dialect is that we notice we don't actually know who the author of this text is, okay? So we're kind of going back to one of those where we don't know much about the author. We don't know who they are for sure. And one of the things that we can kind of tell by looking at this text, though, is that this person is probably from like northern England, right? Based on their word choices and things like that. We also kind of know a little bit. We think that this person is probably the same person who wrote Pearl, Patience, and Purity because they were all found in the same manuscript and they all have a lot of language and form kind of similarities that suggest this is probably the same person. At the same time, it's disputed, and so you'll hear the author of this referred to as the Pearl poet a lot. Some people refer to them as the Gawain poet. And so you can see there, like, there is a little bit of disagreement, potentially about what the assumption is about who wrote this. It's unknown, but we can tell a lot. Like, they seem to know a lot about armor, of that time, of like the 14th century, the kind of things that, because there's actually a lot of anachronisms in this. Um, and so, they're wearing, Gawain, like, for example, is wearing like really nice 14th century quality armor and things like that. But anyway, so we can kind of tell a little bit about them based on that kind of knowledge. But at the same time, we don't know for sure who they are. If you're curious about that, though, there is a lot of speculation you can read. So getting into the plot, I'm going to try to keep this short because, we really just need to know the broad strokes. But basically, there's a Christmas feast King Arthur's hosting. This green stranger comes in. He has this big axe and he presents a challenge that he will, let somebody take a swing at his head, as long as he is able to in a year's time do the same to them that they've done to him. And so this is something that we're going to talk about in a second. It's called a beheading challenge. Anyway, and he starts to mock the court because nobody's taking the challenge. Finally, Arthur says, "Okay, I'll do it." He takes the axe, and then Gawain steps in and is like, "No, no, 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 no. This is something I need to do." And so he cuts off the Green Knight's head. And you would think that that's kind of the end of the story, right? But uh, Gawain seems not to have noticed that this person seemed very confident coming in here and challenging him to behead him. And also, he's green. So maybe he's got a little magic going on here. So the Green Knight just picks up his head and rides away, and is like, "Hey, don't forget, you said 1 year. I get to chop off your head." Long story short, Gawain goes on this journey to the Green Chapel where he's supposed to meet the Green Knight. And on the way there, he meets the Lord and Lady. The Lord says, "I'm going to go hunting every day. I'm going to give you whatever hunt whatever I get hunting, as long as you give me any gifts that you receive while you're, resting in my house, waiting for this challenge. And so basically the lady of the house tries to seduce Gawain and for a few days. So she gives him a kiss. He keeps resisting her, right? And so she gives him one kiss, two kisses, three kisses. And then when the Lord comes home with his whatever he's hunted that day, and shares it with Gawain, then Gawain kisses him twice, kisses him three times. But the thing is that the wife, the lady of the house, she also gives him this belt that's supposed to be like enchanted to basically protect him so that whenever he's supposed to go get his head cut off, he won't be harmed. And Gawain, even though he's made this deal with the Lord, he doesn't give him that belt. And so then when he goes to the Green Knight and he's supposed to get his head chopped off, right? Um, the Green Knight tries to swing at him and he flinches and the Green Knight kind of makes fun of him. Finally, he swings and he just kind of cuts the back of his neck. He doesn't chop his head off. And we find out that the Green Knight um, knows all about this belt, right? And so he knows that Gawain wasn't honorable. He did not live up to his deal, and he's basically lied. And then also, but he also appreciates that Gawain actually showed up. He followed through with this deal that he made, even though he thought he was going to die, right? And so it's kind of interesting. We have this sort of gray area um, hero. It's kind of we're kind of unclear. He's not evil. He's not perfect. It's kind of an interesting character, and you can kind of make it your judgments for yourself. I think the writer's kind of inviting the reader to kind of decide what they think in terms of the morality of the story and how Gawain rates. Um, anyway, let me pause really quick. All right, I'm hopping back in. So just to recap, just one more thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned is that the Green Knight reveals that he is the Lord of the House, right? And we also learned that Morgan is has schemed. This has all been kind of a big scheme of hers, right? All right. So talking about language and form here. This is going to be a alliterative verse again, something that we're pretty familiar with, I think, at this point. This is going to be part of the alliterative revival, meaning this is going to be long after the Old English text that we've read before. It's going to be, I think, 1350 to 1500. And so we have some changes in terms of the form. It says, this is from the Norton Anthology, the line is longer and does not contain a fixed number or pattern of stresses like the classical alliterative measure of Old English poetry. Okay, so there are a few notable changes. The other thing that we can notice from this, and this is actually, this over here is actually from the first lines of the poem. There's a bob and wheel here at the end. And so here's our alliterative verse. At the end, this 15th line, we have a bob, which is this really short line. And here we have this bold word is going to be rhyming with these other bold words here. And you can tell kind of by the word endings that those are going to rhyme. And then we also have here we have the wheel. This is going to be 4 lines. And so, what we've talked about with alliterative verse in the past is that we don't really have rhymes up here. It's going to be based on the system of this verse is going to be based on alliteration and meter and the caesura and all this stuff. And so if you look at this, though, this is definitely relying on rhyme. You're going to have a little bit more like standard meter and things like that. And so it's just kind of an interesting detail in this poem. All right. So some tropes and themes. This is going to be a chivalric romance, right? We have a legendary knight going on an adventure. And we're going to be seeing celebrations of the idealized code of civilized behavior that combines loyalty, honor, and courtly love, right? And so if you want to read a little bit more about that, I've got a few sources there from, Wikipedia here, and then this definition is coming from Oxford. And then this is going to be another Arthurian legend. You might have guessed because King Arthur is there. Also Guinevere, Lancelot, Morgan. We have all of these different characters. And then again, like I said, this is going to be featuring a beheading game. Um, and the definition here is from the Norton Anthology. A supernatural challenger offers to let his head be cut off in exchange for a return blow. And this is a trope identified like by folklorists. We can see other examples of this and from much earlier. And I haven't looked up the pronunciation on this, so not going to try just in case I'm misleading here. But this Middle Irish tale is a good example. You can see some similarities. It's quite different too, but if you want to read it, you can read the text here, and then this is a reference. And if you want to read more about beheading games, they're right here. And then you might recognize this image from from our class. Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of sort of notable things about the text is the way it starts and ends with the fall of Troy. And so, what the heck, right? And this is related to, I believe it's called the Brutus books. And basically, there's sort of um, this significance of Troy, and specifically the fall of Troy to British people in the Middle Ages. It says here, this is coming from Oxford. In the Middle Ages, the fall of Troy functioned as a secular parallel to the fall of man, think like Adam and Eve. The story of Troy's fall and the romantic subplots invented by medieval writers functioned as moral exempla from which readers could learn political, military, and personal virtues. And so, if the word exempla sounds familiar to you, just keep in mind the Pardoner's Tale from last week when we were reading Chaucer is an example of an exemplum. And that's basically where a preacher, religious leader or whatever, is going to tell a story that has some sort of moral. And so, if you want to learn more about that, I've got definitions here. And if you want to learn more about this fall of Troy and the significance, you can read this Oxford. This is just a quote from that. And then if you want to learn more about medieval Britain's fascination with Troy, I also pulled a blog article from the British Library that I thought was really interesting. It's very short, but it has pictures of texts and things that I thought were really cool. And then finally, if you really want to do a deep dive, I almost went down this rabbit hole and I had to stop myself. There is this mythological founder of Britain, Brutus of Troy. You can read about him on Wikipedia, and it really is. You could really learn a lot about this if this is something that's interesting to you. And I love, the classics. So I'm dying to learn more, but I'm gotta stay on track. Okay. And then translations and adaptations. I wanted to talk about this just because I really do think that this is a story that's aged really well. If we're thinking of the other things that we've read this semester, some of them really feel so of the time. Like they're really fascinating, but they're not necessarily something that feels like it could exist in a contemporary setting in the same way. And I mean, I could be totally wrong, but I do think that this is one that feels more suited to like a contemporary reader. And so I wanted to talk about there's two major translations of this that I see referenced a lot, and there's definitely other translations. We have Tolkien, if you've heard of him. He did a translation of this, and this is going to be like a much more traditional um, telling of the story. So if you're looking at the language of it and everything, it's definitely going to look like an older, like Middle English version. And then if you're looking for something more contemporary, the Simon Armitage version is definitely that. And this is a really popular, excuse me, really popular translation. I know I shared with Beowulf the Maria Devlin Headley translation, which is definitely more experimental. And so it's not quite there, but it is very easy to read, and it's gotten a lot of praise. There was some readings that I found. I don't remember if I linked to those that I found that he did, that Harvard has shared on their website. There's articles that he's, interviews and things that he's done for The Guardian and The New Yorker and everything. And so it's a really popular translation. It's gotten a lot of praise, and it's very easy to read. So I would recommend that one. I think they're both great. I own both. And then I had to share with you, I found this film adaptation called Sword of the Valiant, which stars, well, it doesn't star, but Sean Connery plays the Green Knight in it. And I think it's from the 70s. So if I can find a copy of this, I will be watching it as soon as possible. More contemporarily, we have The Green Knight, which is an A24 film, and has Dev Patel playing. It's up here, playing Gawain and the Green Knight. And it's a really interesting version. I think David Lowery, he definitely took some liberties. It's not like super true to the original story, but he's pulling in a lot of things that um were like they're meaningful and significant. And I think it's not, he wasn't like just making changes like for Flash or anything like that. Like it really is interesting. I think the choices that he made. And he says he's a huge fan of the Green Knight, so or of the story that we just read. So I think it shows. And then finally, I have a couple of animation stuff. So we have Adventure Time. They have an episode called 17 that features the Green Knight. And then finally, we have this web comic called Gawain and the Green Knight. It's beautiful. I am going to read it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but this is free online to read. And yeah, so I think that's it this week. I'm really looking forward to moving on to the Tudor age, but I also really loved talking about all of these medieval Middle English texts with you. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you next week.